yesterday! The hole! That's your hole! Are you too good for your hole? Answer me! Listener! So you will listen to every damn word I have to say!
I'm surprised that one, I'm back so soon, and that two, Adam Sandler's the reason why. With Netflix's Hustle out, it's safe to say that Adam Sandler is the next comedian to journey down the comedian to serious actor pipeline. Robin Williams did it with Good Will Hunting and went on to star in a number of great dramatic roles throughout the 90s, early 2000s, and even 2010s. Quote me on that. Bill Murray attempted the switch with Razor's Edge in 1989, but didn't fully make the shift from comedian to dramatic actor until 2003's Lost in Translation. Whoopi Goldberg with The Color Purple, Jim Carrey, Richard Pryor. It's not uncommon for comedians to take the leap towards dramatic roles. Sometimes as a means to legitimize themselves, sometimes just to diversify their catalog, or to avoid being typecast as a dated comedian. But Adam Sandler's journey into dramatic acting especially interests me. And I don't know if it's because he's one of the only actors that I listed just now that I've been able to see make the shift from comedian to dramatic actor in my lifetime, but I just can't shake how jarring and sudden this shift feels to me. It doesn't quite feel like the same trajectory that other comedians had to becoming esteemed dramatic actors. Where most comedians have had some level of social esteem within the comedy genre and then shift to transfer that esteem towards more dramatic projects, Adam Sandler at one point was the poster boy for making quick buck, shitty comedies. In my mind, he basically went from being the sappy lead in widely hated B-list comedies like Jack and Jill to being the soul of an engaging indie film like Uncut Gems. And it's not like I haven't seen impressive dramatic acting chops from Adam Sandler. He has a short but growing list of dramatic performances that I've been a fan of. But what makes this point in his career different from any of his other ventures into dramatic acting is that it marks a break in a pattern that he's maintained for like 20 years. Since the early 2000s, Adam Sandler has had a pattern of taking one or two dramatic roles in between his dozens of far more successful and well-known comedies and rom-coms. But recently, Adam Sandler's been taking a lot more dramatic roles than we're used to seeing him take. The frequency of dramatic roles that he's taking in comparison to comedic roles is uncharacteristic for a guy that made Pixels, Hotel Transylvania, and The Ridiculous Six all in the same year. Granted, this might be a little over-analytical. He could just be a guy that knows he can make a quick buck making low-budget comedies and now wants to try his hand at some dramatic performances. But nevertheless, this shift towards drama breaks the pattern of B-list comedies that he's been known for, legitimizing him as a dramatic and serious actor to an entirely new generation, something that I'm sure no one saw coming in the late 90s or even the early 2010s. And I'm not mad at it. Like, let me just say, I've never been one of those people that hated Adam Sandler, even when it was cool to rag on him. I'm just confused on how we got here. So let's take a look back at every dramatic Adam Sandler role that led us here. Really, think of this less of an objective reflection of Adam Sandler's career and more of me trying to trace back the moments throughout his career where I could have predicted the shift. And as a note, when I say an Adam Sandler movie, just know that I mean that to say a film where Adam Sandler is a lead character, not necessarily where he's a director or producer, although you will find a couple of those in here. All right, so we'll start from the beginning. He started off playing goofy Peter Pan complex characters that had a knack for being unbelievably annoying. Clearly a really talented musician, he got his start on SNL and earned a number of films stemming from his success there. But at this point, he was only really making irreverent comedies, which did really well in the late 90s and early 2000s. While some of his earlier, more down-to-earth, shy guy, romantic comedy roles might actually be the first signal to shift his departure from the loud, irreverent roles he became known for following SNL, I'm skipping past those and moving on to a role that I can more confidently say is a departure from that playful, over-the-top type of role. In Punch Drunk Love, he plays a bathroom supplier manufacturer. I never really double-checked. That's just the vibe I got. That leads an aggressively uninspiring and boring life. He starts falling for one of his sister's co-workers, and then that doesn't really go well until the very end. This down on his luck character is the first of many that Adam Sandler will play throughout his career, and like most of his future movies, begins to bridge the gap between the comedy of misfortune and the deep nihilism that would build in a character who feels nothing ever goes right for them. This sense of hopelessness and loneliness and boyish sensitivity is something that I recognize in a lot of Adam Sandler's critically acclaimed performances. And based on his filmography, I'm pretty sure this is his first crack at this kind of role. Even though he's pretty good in this movie, it's never been a favorite. This movie is also a perfect example of how even in good Adam Sandler dramatic roles, I always feel like I'm watching Adam Sandler play himself, but if he had a different job, were lonely and depressed all the time, and had a random attractive love interest that makes no sense. After Punch Drunk Love, we revisit some of the comedy collaborations he's known for with Rob Schneider and Drew Barrymore, and a bunch of other movies, some not bad, and most I couldn't tell you anything about. I'm skipping the just go with it's in the 51st Dates and some of those rom-coms, which, to be fair, could have some interesting dramatic chops to offer. But I'm not gonna lie, I haven't seen those movies, and I don't plan on it. Mostly because I'm willing to say none of them come even slightly close to 2004's Spanglish. This shit used to come on in the middle of the day on the E! Channel, and I don't care if I was 30 minutes in, 30 minutes to the end, I was finishing Spanglish. It's a story that centers, you guessed it, a relatively uninspired and aimless Adam Sandler whose life brightens when he meets his new housekeeper, played by Paz Vega, Fleurs. Adam Sandler, whose name is John Klasky in the film, his wife is having an affair on him, mostly because it's the only way that we could root for him and Fleurs to be in a relationship together, and she's generally really mean to their shared child, Bernice, which is contrasted to Fleurs' relationship with her daughter, Christina. This is a story of a single immigrant mother and how nothing will stop her from providing for her daughter. Not money, not access, and not even the prospect of love. Something that stands out in this film in comparison to other Adam Sandler starring roles is that he doesn't get the girl in this movie. Instead of the triumphant last act where Fleurs and John blending their families and running off together to start a life, Adam Sandler's typical storybook ending gets cut off by real life. There's a sympathy that you're compelled to have for him and for everyone in the film because of the denial of that happy ending. It's a sympathy that's well-deserved considering how honest and real John Klasky feels as someone who's unhappy in his marriage and ultimately trying to find joy in his life through his children. Even with my love for this movie, it still feels like Adam Sandler playing Adam Sandler, but unhappy with a different job and with a very random, attractive love interest. All in all, Adam Sandler has a knack for being in basic run-of-the-mill rom-coms with a tinge of heart and soul, and this is easily my favorite of that kind. As refreshing as a more grounded film like Spanglish is in comparison to some of his work in the late 90s and early 2000s, absolutely nothing compared to what he was able to achieve as Charlie Feynman in 2007's Reign Over Me. If Punch Drunk Love proved that he was more than a comedian, then Reign Over Me proved that comedy was the least of what he was capable of. In short, and I am intentionally keeping this short, you should definitely see this if you're interested in seeing a dramatic Adam Sandler role. The story is about Alex Johnson, played by Don Cheadle, who by chance runs across his old college roommate, Charlie, played by Adam Sandler in New York City. In the years since they last saw each other, Charlie lost his entire family and more or less disappeared. They begin to rekindle their friendship, but Charlie is clearly suffering from extreme PTSD, and the majority of the movie is Don Cheadle's character navigating how to help him heal without breaking him. While this still plays to that guy down on his luck pocket that Adam Sandler tends to gravitate towards, Charlie Feynman is such a uniquely layered character that's way more than just a guy falling on hard times. It's not Adam Sandler's usual guy disenchanted with life, looks for an escape, and then learns a lesson kind of movie. It's actually really compelling character acting that makes you sympathetic not just for a likable underdog, but for a real and flawed person with really ugly moments suffering from mental illness. Again, for the most part, I don't watch an Adam Sandler movie and forget that I'm watching Adam Sandler. In this movie, I definitely did forget. This starts to feel like the beginning of him starting to shed his usual opt to play himself. Although, even with my respect for this movie, it definitely does have a random attractive love interest that, in my opinion, makes no sense and would have been far more powerful without. As we enter the 2010s, he starts to have a crack at more dramedies. That's where we get 2009's Funny People. This movie was really hard to get through. I forgot just how bad some of the early Judd Apatow movies are, but Funny People's brightest spot is truly Adam Sandler. Like I said, we're getting self-referential here. Funny People is about George Simmons, world-renowned comedian known for B-list movies that seem to slightly embarrass him, but he ultimately embraces. He's living the regular celebrity lifestyle when he discovers that he's terminally ill, and begins to partner with a local obscure comedian, played by Seth Rogen, to write jokes for him and be his assistant in his last days. Clearly reflecting on the objectively shitty movies that made him famous, this definitely feels like another iteration of just Adam Sandler playing himself, but depressed, but in a way that has more depth. The entire movie is basically just a bromance between Seth Rogen and Adam Sandler, with a bunch of celebrity cameos in between. But I think the most interesting thing about this movie is it shows Adam Sandler's alarming awareness of his own legacy. George Simmons staring death in the face feels a lot like Adam Sandler's proxy. Looking back at all the potty humor and loudmouth jokes that he'd become known for, and really considering if that's what he wants his legacy to be. He still does all the weird voices and sex jokes that you'd expect from an Adam Sandler movie, but unlike in other films, you'll find in Funny People, these jokes are typically undercut with criticism or with an uncomfortable silence that doesn't entirely excuse them as passable jokes. While this does feel like more of the same, a guy down on his luck who learns a lesson about life, and I don't want to drag him or his work, but I do think that Funny People represents a future that Adam Sandler fears. One where he's, sure, famous and world-renowned, but is ultimately lonely and surrounded by other potty-mouthed comedians who seem to only respect him for work that he appears to be ready to move on from. And he has another unnecessary love interest. Now, the era we expected. This is the era of time we all know about Adam Sandler. A year after Funny People, we go into Grown Ups, which, from what I've actually heard, isn't a bad movie. It's what the success of this movie inspired him to make for the next 10 years is what's bad. Joe Dirt 2? In between this era is a drama called Men, Women, and Children from 2014 that I did not watch because it did not look like fun. Honestly, it looked like another internet bad, book good movie, and I just didn't feel like watching some pretentious movie about internet culture. If I'm missing something, tell me in the comments. I'm pretty sure I didn't miss anything though. But with that, I would like to jump onto the first Adam Sandler movie that I saw, not as a child, that made me recognize him as a dramatic actor. 2017's The Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected. Noah Baumbach is a great director and writer, period. I think the first film I saw of his was The Squid and the Whale, and no, this is not a video about Noah Baumbach, but I just want to say that to say I think his writing combined with Adam Sandler's ability for hyper-realism. Adam Sandler has an incredible knack for being able to make them feel like they've lived beyond the few hours that you've seen them on screen. Seeing these two entities come together, they were just able to make an incredibly compelling story about a family that's broken, but ultimately still united. Interesting enough, Adam Sandler as Danny Meyerowitz actually feels like a testament to his ability as a comedian. There's often a point in great comedy sets to where the comedian takes a more serious and personable approach to what they're talking about. It doesn't feel like a set anymore. It feels like they're talking directly to you and divulging their unedited thoughts. Adam Sandler's scene at his father's art show at the end feels exactly like that. While the entire cast has really great emotional moments throughout this movie, I'd say that Adam Sandler is still the standout performance. Sure, he's down on his luck, perpetually limping, and the forgotten son of an ego-driven ex-artist. But there's a passion and a comfortability that he possesses in some of the film's most uncomfortable and vulnerable scenes that remind me of the emotion of a comedian's set, where they just really let it all hang out. Danny does feel like an Adam Sandler character, but in a more honest take on that archetypal character of himself. One that isn't asking for sympathy from anyone and is going about his life whether people like it or not. Oh, and he has a far more believable romantic love interest in this movie. From here, we arrive for where most people expected us to be, Uncut Gems. I don't have anything to say about this film that hasn't already been said. It's a great movie. But within the context of this video, I think it's interesting to view this through the lens of Adam Sandler and his repeated usage of the guy down on his luck trope. Or rather, people's inclination to cast him in that type of role. While mostly every other Adam Sandler character is beat down by being down on his luck, Howard Ratner thrives on being underestimated. For most of the movie, he maneuvers unfortunate situation after unfortunate situation and just barely skates out okay. But not once does he feel uninspired or unmotivated, unlike Sandler's earlier dramatic characters. And he's able to utilize people underestimating him until the very end where his luck truly runs out. He's a compelling character not just because he's down on his luck and sympathetic, but because he's relentless. And with that sense of relentless motivation comes a certain agency that we don't tend to see with Adam Sandler characters. He's not just a guy lost at sea with life being thrown at him. Howard Ratner is the storm. He is the force driving the plot, and that's an incredibly fun thing to see in a character in general, and especially in an Adam Sandler movie. And this leads us to 2022's Hustle. He plays Stanley Sugarman, a basketball recruiter fighting to bring an obscure, promising overseas basketball player played by Juancho Hernan Gomez to the 76ers after his mentor and owner of the team dies and his ego-driven son takes his place, standing in Stanley's way. I really do love me a good feel-good sports movie. And this really is your typical sports movie, but Adam Sandler really makes it just that much better. Also in this movie, it kind of clicked for me why Adam Sandler plays the underdog role so well, especially this far into his career. This movie made me realize most Adam Sandler movies rely on the likability of Adam Sandler and our awareness as audience members of his filmography as the likable nice guy. The lovable dad, the shy guy in love, the sensitive underdog. Because Adam Sandler tends to play roles that are somewhat familiar to the last one, these are all traits that we attribute to Adam Sandler himself. And we apply this knowledge to any future character that Adam Sandler plays. It's the same reason why it was a pretty good casting choice to make Chris Evans' character in 2019's Knives Out the killer of the film, notably during the height of Marvel's success and his notoriety as the trustworthy and do-good Captain America. It's using meta-casting at its finest, using the knowledge or the perception that we have of actors outside of this film and knowing how to use that against us within the film. Or maybe, in Adam Sandler's case, using it to your advantage with building this character. Because of this image that we have of Adam Sandler, the movie doesn't really have to do much to make us root for him. Again, this movie is no Coach Carter or Remember the Titans, but it's a solid story that you've seen before with characters that make you believe in the heart of the movie, even if you've seen this heart 1,000 times in every sports movie ever. It doesn't feel as cliche as it usually would because of the likability and believability that Adam Sandler is able to bring to this character. I know I'm raving about this, but it's not that this film is anything incredibly special, so much as I think it just hits all the sweet spots and niches that we talked about with Adam Sandler in every movie before this. The sensitivity of Punch Drunk Love, the passion of the Meyerowitz stories, and the drive of Uncut Gems all culminate into a really typical sports movie that's made great by a sympathetic and easy lead to root for, and you can definitely count on Adam Sandler to be that. Adam Sandler clearly gravitates towards that underdog role, and it'll be interesting to see where his dramatic career takes him as older roles become more available to him and ventures off into new ones that he'll grow into. If the roles that we talked about today are any indication, it might be safe to say that Adam Sandler's 2010s reputation might be a thing of the past. But that wraps up this video. The lighting has changed. This is taking me 3 hours to do. I've had many battery packs die, my SD card ran out of storage. It's been a time, and I did it for Sandler.